What was first just a dream has become a frightening reality for those who may oppose us.
This ever happened before?
No, this is new.
Lucky us!
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the most mediocre podcast in the Star Wars universe, the 1313 podcast. This week, it is just me, Jackson. And you might be asking yourself, Jackson, why is it just you on this strange episode that you have going on today? Well, for our viewers and our listeners who have tuned into the podcast before over this past semester, you know that I am taking a class called Apocalypse to Zombie. And what this class is about is talking about ancient text and how it is then interpreted later into our pop culture of zombie and other weird kind of traditions in movies as well. But for that class, I was tasked with making a final project. And before in my religion classes, I've created videos which are available on our Patreon. But for this video, I wanted to make it something available to everybody. And so that's why today I present to you the Apocalypse of Ahsoka. Now, what is the Apocalypse of Ahsoka about? Well, the purpose of this video today for you all is to compare Ezra and Enoch from Ahsoka to their biblical counterparts from specifically the text 1st Enoch and then 4th Ezra. Now, this video is going to be a little bit different than any of the other videos that we have had. I'm going to be not only talking about Star Wars, but I will be discussing religious themes in an academic sense as well. So, if that's not really for you, that's okay. Tune in on Fridays at 7 a.m. Eastern Standard Time for our newest episode. But, if you're here for this video, then thank you for joining me today. Now, I thought I would give a little bit of background information on what exactly I've been doing in my class over this semester so that you have a better understanding of the material that I'm going to talk about today. Now, kind of a general overview of my Apocalypse to Zombie class. At the beginning of this semester, we were very much really deep diving into the texts of Daniel, 1st Enoch, 4th Ezra, Revelation, and a bunch of other apocalyptic texts, and then looking at key elements and themes from those texts and then seeing how they are applied in our life today, or maybe how they've been the influence of a lot of other cultural and social movements as well. Now, an apocalypse in of itself is meant to invoke some feeling of nostalgia. That's the whole point of it. When you're reading an apocalyptic text, you're saying, wow, like everything right now sucks, and I wish we could go back to the good old days where everything was bright and peachy and we didn't have this messed up society that we're in today. Sound familiar? That's exactly their point though. And in an apocalyptic text, they commonly use complex symbols that are meant to reflect the current state of society. That will be discussed a little bit later in this presentation as well. But the characters that I wanted to focus on were Ezra and Enoch. Now, after watching the first season of Ahsoka, I absolutely loved it. And what really stuck to me too is that I was looking at these texts that we were studying and was thinking to myself, wait a minute, that seems almost exactly like something that happened in Ahsoka, or maybe that seemed to almost directly influence that as well. And maybe even some of the texts can help us predict season 2 of Ahsoka as well. But in today's video, I will be discussing the ancient texts of 4th Ezra and 1st Enoch with their Star Wars counterparts, discussing what makes them similar, maybe where did Ezra and Enoch and Ahsoka differ from their biblical counterparts, and then looking towards the future as well. So, without further ado, everybody, let's get right into the video. Now, the first text that I wanted to talk about today was 4th Ezra. Now, 4th Ezra is an example of what is called a prophetic apocalypse. This means that everything in the world sucks. But hold on, God will save you. And that's really the essence of what Ezra is about. Everything that is going on in the world is really, really bad, and the Israelites just need to remain and have hope in God that He will save them all. Now, for translation redundancy, when 4th Ezra is translated into English sometimes, it is also referred to as 2nd Esdras. I'm not even going to touch that or get into it. Specifically for this video, it will be referred to as 4th Ezra in this discussion. Now, It's important to know about 4th Ezra that it was written during the Second Temple period. Now, the Second Temple period is also during the Roman rule over the Jewish people as well, which plays a whole lot into the context of this text as well. It's also important to note that at the same time 4th Ezra is being written, Revelation is also thought to have been written at about the exact same period. Now, to kind of date it more specifically, this is during the Roman Emperor reign Domitian, and that is why when we touch on what is the beast that is revealed in this text, it is reflected as an eagle. This is also commonly done in Revelation to talk about Rome as a country and how the Roman people were very oppressive to the Jewish people living in that area at a time. And the essence of the story is that God will deliver you from the Romans and you will be safe. But hold on to that eagle idea for right now. Now, you may be asking yourself too, okay, if we're talking about 4th Ezra, what happened to the other 3? Now, the first book of Ezra is actually canonically in the Christian Bible that we have today. The second book of Ezra was then renamed to Nehemiah, which also ended up making it into the Christian Bible. 3rd Ezra kind of gets trashed, don't worry about it. 4th Ezra doesn't make it into the text, but it makes it into some other cultures' texts. Specifically, Roman and Slavic Orthodox Bibles will contain 4th Ezra as a canon text. Now, it is also important to know as well that 4th Ezra was originally included in the Vulgate Bible, which for those of you who might not know, Vulgate's Bible was the first time somebody had sat down and tried to put together a comprehensive book called the Bible. Now, understanding the text itself is a little bit difficult, and navigating it as well could be challenging. That is why specifically for this video, I'm using the New Oxford Annotated Bible, just because it includes a good commentary of the Apocrypha in that as well. But the original text of 4th Ezra did not survive. Its sister copies, though, did. And those were in Greek, Syrian, and a few other languages, but the Syrian copy is still around today. Now that you have this general background of how the heck does 4th Ezra come into the picture in a historical context, let's get into what the text actually talks about. Now, in it, we are given 7 visions with future outlooks, and specifically for this video, I'm going to be discussing chapters 2, 3, 11, and 12, because those include the most important themes about the end of the world and then the Messiah to come. Now, for those of you who may be watching, who might be Christian like myself, it is important to realize that when I am using terms like Messiah, and later when I discuss Enoch, will be referred to as the Son of Man, this is not talking about Jesus. For the Jewish people, the Messiah was always meant to be some sort of warrior figure who would bring Israel back into a ruling power, because God had made a promise to David that he would forever hold his family on the throne of Israel forever. And understanding as well that we do, as Christians, borrow a text from our Jewish brothers and sisters, the Torah, these all have very different meanings. So again, Messiah is talking about this warrior person, and then when I talk about Son of Man later, Son of Man means a bunch of different things. We obviously interpret it as Jesus, but for them, Son of Man might be an archangel in this book, or in another book, it might be a man acting holy, such as a Son of Man. So keep that in mind for right now as I discuss these topics. But in chapter 2, verse 30, God is discussing to Ezra about what is to come. Now, in this dialogue as well, God does not talk directly to Ezra, and this is a very common theme for the rest of these apocryphic texts, is that you have God, you have the angels, and then you have the person that they are talking to. God and whoever that they are talking to will never coincide. An angel always has to speak to the person, and then it goes back up that chain. So just remember that as well. So Ezra, at the beginning of the text, wants us to believe that this is 13 years after the destruction of the temple. But again, as I mentioned before, that isn't the case. This is during the Second Temple period. And that God is then speaking to Ezra then through angels about the impending end. The unholy in the world are going to be punished, and God is only going to save the righteous. So you better hold on to your hats because things are about to get messy, and you better hold steady in your faith to God. And so Ezra does what every other Israelite prophet does at this time and goes to the people of Israel and says, hey, people of Israel, God said that he's going to punish the whole world, but we have to remain faithful. And if you don't do that, you're also going to end up punished. And just like every other circumstance in the Bible, the Israelites do not listen, and they kind of kick Ezra out. So Ezra's just kind of on his own at this point. And again, remember this impending warning of the end that God will then punish those who are wicked and then save those who are righteous. Now, kind of fast forward then to chapter 11, verse 1 through 39. This is where we have the imagery of the beast. For those of you familiar with the book of David, there are 4 beasts talked about in that book. Each beast is supposed to represent a different kingdom at that period of time that was oppressing the Jewish people, and that God would essentially get rid of all of those beasts and then raise up Israel once again as the greatest nation. But Daniel is being shown through the angel what is referred to as the 4th beast. Now in Daniel, the beasts are a lion, a bear, a leopard, and then all we get for the 4th is a beast with 10 horns. But the angel is now reinterpreting this to mean something very different. Recognizing that this is during the period of Rome, the symbol of Rome being an eagle, the 4th beast is an eagle. And on that eagle, in chapter 10, verses 13, there are 8 different wings, which all have different meanings to them, which I'll discuss in just a second. But the angel talks to Ezra and says, a kingdom shall rise like no other. However, this kingdom had never fallen. In chapter 12, verse 20 through 23, the eagle is shown to be having 8 different wings, and it speaks through its chest. Biblical monsters literally make absolutely no sense when you try drawing it. Please bear with me. But it's almost this disgusting amalgamation of something. But the angel interprets what this is, because he is talking to Ezra and saying that you once knew the 4th beast to be that which had the 10 horns. But I am here to tell you what that really meant. And so what it is supposed to mean in the 8 feathers is that the 8 different wings, are different kingdoms. Now, most of these kingdoms will just about die off. A couple will die off almost immediately. 3 almost make it to the end of time, and then 2 almost make it to the end of time. But it's important to notice that then the Most High, who is God in this circumstance, will raise up 3 kings to rule during the period of the end. Now, in chapter 12, verse 31 through 35, this is one of the most important verses in this chapter. Now, Ezra's looking at this beast, eagle thingy that doesn't make sense when you try and draw it, but please bear with me again. And there's some sort of lion like pestering it from the outskirts, and the eagle gets annoyed. And the angel says to Ezra, this is the Messiah, whom the Most High has kept until the end of days, who arise from the offspring of David and will come and speak with them. This is the prophecy of Messiah again. For Ezra experiencing this as well, the angel is telling him that, hey, Rome is going to oppress you to the brink of death practically. The Jewish people will be tried and tested. But if you hold on to your faith and you keep being righteous, God will deliver you and he will destroy Rome, and you will never have to suffer this great oppression again. Now, biggest points of Ezra that you should remember going forward for the video is that God talking about Ezra about the end of time, and then the eagle and Messiah, the eagle being Rome, and then the lion being the Messiah that God will eventually bring to save them from the end. Now we get into Enoch, and Enoch is a very different apocalyptic story than Ezra. Instead of being a hopeful ending that everything is going to suck, but hold fast, God will save you, this is a, yep, everything sucks and it's going to be destroyed, and there's nothing you can do about it either. So, knowing that, these are, again, 2 very conflicting ideas that will end up messing with my general talk about Ahsoka too, where Ezra has been an established character in the Bible and even has his own book. Enoch really isn't. Enoch first appears in the Christian Bible in Genesis chapter 5, verses 18 through 24, And the segment that I'm quoting is that Enoch walked with God, and he was no more, for God took him. And that's it. Like, that is actually it about what we have about Enoch. He's referenced later in Jude chapter 114. Enoch, the seventh of Adam, prophesied about them. See, the Lord is coming with thousands upon thousands of his holy ones. And again, that's really it. We don't really get much of Enoch at all. He's established very briefly at the beginning of time as being a descendant of Adam, and that's it. He's referenced once or twice in the New and the Old Testament, and they're just kind of like throwaway verses, basically. I mean, it's nothing too important. But from this, we end up getting what is the composite text of First Enoch, which discusses major events of forbidden knowledge and about the end and an apocalyptic theme as well. Now, as I just mentioned, it's important to know that this text was composed approximately around 40 BC, which is just right before King Herod took reign, and then Jesus is thought to have been birthed around that time as well. And the text itself is a composite text, meaning that you had stories from Greek and Hebrew and Aramaic, and it's just kind of all mushed into this one thing that we have. Now, there are a few different translations and commentaries of First Enoch. For this video, I use Nickelsburg's translation of First Enoch. I really like that, and I think it is one of the best. It's what our religious professor had us look at as well, so I would 100% recommend that version if you would like to look into First Enoch for yourself. But in First Enoch, you have 5 different books. You have the Book of the Watchers, the Book of the Parables of Enoch, an astronomical book, a book of dream visions, and then the Epistle of Enoch. Now, for the sake of this video, I'm only going to be talking about those first 2. So the Book of the Watchers and the Book of Parables, because those are arguably the most important and they contain the most apocalyptic stuff relevant to this video. I read the entirety of First Enoch. Please trust me on this one. But there are a few basic themes for this as well that are important going into it that I feel like you should also understand. It is the idea, again, that Enoch is given secret knowledge by God about how the universe works and how things happen and such. And it is also revealed to Enoch the inner workings of existence. Again, Son of Man will probably come up in my discussion as well, so please remember what I just talked about before. This is not Jesus. Now, really getting into the Book of the Watchers first. Now, who are the Watchers? In chapter 6, verse 1, we're introduced to the Watchers. They kind of act as these overlooks in heaven, and they're looking down on the earth that God has just created, and they see all these cool new things, because they don't get cool new things in heaven. Everything stays the same, apparently, I guess. And they make a pact with themselves, and they say, okay, let's all disobey God and go down to earth so that we can not only take wives there, but we can teach the people living there the forbidden knowledge that we have about the universe. And this kind of ranges from everything. It could be from metal work to witchcraft and yada yada, but the Watchers end up doing that, and then they mate with female women, and it is also discussed in the text that the offspring of the Watchers are these beast-like things that just end up killing everyone and thing. It doesn't really make too much sense. We see that in chapter 9, verse 1 through 11, the angels go to God to complain, essentially, and be like, God, if you are all-knowing, are powerful, and you know what is happening on earth, why aren't you doing anything about this? And that's kind of where that ends. The angels really just complain to God about why he isn't doing anything, but God eventually is going to do something according to First Enoch. It's just going to happen a little bit later. Then we get into chapter 18, verses 1 through 6, where Enoch is then shown the ends of the earth and how things come together. And jumping forward then to chapter 22, verses 1 through 14, this is where Enoch is shown the mountain of the dead. Now, the mountain of the dead is also revealed to be the place where people's souls go when they die. Now, the Jewish belief for death is that when you die, your soul, or your nephesh, goes to Sheol. And Sheol is just kind of like a hangout area for everybody's souls until God decides to raise up and bring about the end and everybody will be finally judged at that point, and everyone will live in New Jerusalem too. So that's essentially where all the souls are being stored right now. Enoch just gets to see it. Now we get into the book of the parables. Now the Lord of Spirits, who is God in this, that's just how he's referred to in this text, in this section as well, gives the angels the ability to translate 3 different parables that Enoch has shown. Now the first parable talks about a situation where all of evil is punished. Now this is in chapter 38 verses 1 through 6, and it isn't quite the flood yet. The flood doesn't happen until the end, but it talks about a situation almost similar to Ezra, where all of the righteous are saved and the evil are punished on this earth for destroying it, aka the Watchers and what they're doing right now. Now parable 2, and specifically chapter 51 verses 1 through 4, Enoch is shown where all those who are punished will end up going, and God discusses that his chosen one, or this Son of Man figure, will be the one to watch over this punishment and stand in as God's second in command. Judgment will then befall the earth, and the righteous will be saved. A great resurrection of Sheol will happen, where everybody's brought up into this New Jerusalem too. Now in the third parable, in chapter 60 verses 7 through 10, talks about a great flood. This is supposed to be the flood that we see in Noah, and first Enoch actually gives a pretty good description, in my opinion, about why the flood actually happens, and it's not just God being upset at people in general for misbehaving. He has a much greater reason in first Enoch to be upset at people, because the Watchers have kind of ruined the whole thing, so now he has to start fresh. Again, this idea that everything is cruddy, you gotta just beat it down to the ground and start anew again. But in this process of the great flood, there is a beast that is meant to rule the water called Leviathan that actually makes it into the Bible. Leviathan is in there. However, there's also a beast that is meant to rule the desert called Dundayan, which doesn't make it in the Bible. Sucks to suck, Dundayan. Leviathan is goated, makes it in the text. Now, it is also important to note in Parable 3 that in chapter 61, verse 8, the Lord of the Spirits seats the chosen one upon the throne, who will then judge all. Now again, just a very, very quick recap about what we saw in Enoch. It's a lot of these parables are kind of the same thing, but it's that the world is going to be destroyed. The good are going to eventually make it, but the whole thing needs to be wrecked in order to finish it and start all over again. How does this relate to Ahsoka? I'm going to be discussing parts 6 through 8 and give a very, very, very brief overview of the events that happen in Ahsoka that are probably going to most relate to what I'm speaking about today. So, the first point that I had is that in chapter 6, Far, Far Away, we see Thrawn stranded on Perdia, and he's just kind of chilling there in an entire other galaxy separate from the galaxy that we've witnessed for the entirety of Star Wars so far. Thrawn uses the Great Mothers to speak to Morgan Elsbeth through the distance of the galaxy. Enoch is also shown to be the commander of Thrawn's army, and he kind of acts as Thrawn's right-hand man throughout this episode and some of the episodes to follow. Enoch then lets Sabine go to find Ezra, and an important quote that I had at the very end of this episode when Thrawn is seen to have realized that Ahsoka actually was able to travel through hyperspace using the Purgles to find him. He says, "Death and resurrection are common misconceptions played up by Night Sisters and Jedi. Remember this theme of resurrection." Now, in part 7, Dreams and Madness, we see Hera talking to the New Republic Council about, like, hey, Thrawn is coming back. Like, we need to be, like, ready for this. This is a real threat. And they don't really believe her. Granted, this is also shown later that during this time, there are Imperial sympathizers all over the New Republic trying to just shut her down and ignore her. But stay tuned. I also have here as well that we see in a fight scene between Ezra, Sabine, and Shin-Hati that Ezra really doesn't really prefer to use weapons, although later he does pick up a blaster, but he prefers to use the Force more because he's become more in tune with it as well, because that is where a Jedi's true strength lies. And then in the final part, part 8, the Jedi, the Witch, and the Warlord, I have that Enoch carries out the rest of Thrawn's plans for leaving Perdia. Ezra and Ahsoka and Sabine fight an undead army created by the Great Mothers. And then I have Thrawn ends up escaping to Dathomir, and then Ezra escapes then back to the New Republic. And that is where we are left for the end of Ahsoka Season 1. Now, how do the texts kind of fit into all of this mess? So here's where I have discussion a little bit about how does Ezra and Enoch match or differ from their biblical counterparts. Now, Ezra's story is a little bit self-explanatory. Ezra in Star Wars Rebels very much mocks how Ezra from the Bible is. Ezra is a story about redemption, and that is exactly what Ezra is able to accomplish. He makes a very selfless sacrifice at the end of Rebels to save his friends and the people of Lothal from Thrawn by using the Purgles to shoot Thrawn's Star Destroyer, the Chimera, into hyperspace, and eventually, as we know now, land on Perdia. But not a whole lot else from there is really happening. I mean, it's not very likely that Ezra's storyline is going to be repeated again and again. What I feel like, too, very much parallels the story from 4th Ezra is the one scene where Hera is in the New Republic area and she's arguing on behalf of her friends, really, that Thrawn is coming back and this needs to be taken seriously. And the people of the New Republic, very much like the Israelites, ignore her because they don't want to think about an impending doom that will occur. But in Ezra's sake as well, a doom may occur, but if you hold fast and work together, everything will be fine. Very similar to that message that we had at the beginning of 4th Ezra. And another very important connection as well that I wanted to make is from 4th Ezra when it discusses the kingdom that has never fallen. I think that is almost right on the dime hitting the Empire. The Empire never really fell after the Battle of Endor and the second Death Star was destroyed. Sure, the rebels won, but not really, because the Empire, as we've seen now, has been operating in the Outer Rims with the focus on Project Necromancer. And even in the newest season of The Mandalorian, we see a whole Shadow Council dedicated to the survival of the Empire too. So, they don't really go away and they fade. And you can even still make this argument as the Empire might fall and then is reborn into the First Order later in the sequel trilogy. Now, while Ezra's comparisons might be a little bit more self-explanatory, Enoch's are a little bit more difficult. I think if you piece together all of the screen time that Enoch is in Ahsoka, I think it's about 7-ish minutes, give or take. So it's in a very unfortunate circumstance that we don't have more to talk about Enoch, but there is a few key points in those 7 minutes of Enoch time that we get in Ahsoka Season 1 that I feel like very much speak to the text of First Enoch. Now, in First Enoch, Enoch is very much God's servant. He's his right-hand man, almost to be his son of man, as you might be able to argue too. And God works through angels to work with Enoch, but in Star Wars, there doesn't need to be an intermediate force. God, Thrawn, can talk right to Enoch, and he doesn't need to go through a middle person. So that's a big way that Enoch in Star Wars differs from the Enoch in First Enoch. Now, although we only see him in those few short times, I'm still very much arguing that Enoch could very be Thrawn's right-hand man. Thrawn depends on Enoch and is giving him almost a future vision and a focus towards what he wants to achieve. It's almost like when there's a dialogue briefly between Baylan Skoll and Shin Hati, where Baylan kind of talks about Thrawn's new uprising as just another person coming to power who's going to rule for a period of time and disappear, and how Baylan wants so much more. He wants to recreate what the galaxy is and make a new way of existence. But I almost believe that's what Thrawn wants as well. In this apocalyptic situation, Thrawn is coming back to the current galaxy that everybody has been residing in, and he's going to bring about some great change. And in this version of it, it isn't one where hold fast to your faith and everything's going to be okay. It's that everything needs to be wiped. Thrawn is going to use anything that he has as a means to an end to achieve his ultimate goal, which hasn't really been revealed to us yet. Yes, he was shipping a bunch of Dead Knight sisters to Dathomir, so I guess the future lies on Dathomir, and we're going to have to stay tuned to Season 2 on that. Now, here's some of my personal predictions, again, based on what we've discussed today, what I think might occur in Ahsoka Season 2. Now, I still am very much going to vouch for the fact that I think that Enoch will be Thrawn's right-hand man. If you have watched the latest season of The Mandalorian, and if you are familiar with most Legends material, Captain Paleon is supposed to be Thrawn's right-hand man. And yes, now he is in Star Wars canon. I just don't think they're going to throw away the significance of Enoch that easily. I feel like Enoch is going to be the ultimate right-hand man, and Paleon is just going to be a puppet that Thrawn operates through to achieve some of his goals. And again, when I talked about an empire that never fell, I really do believe that it's straight up almost referring to the empire that we have in the show too. But one of the biggest, kind of things that I have to discuss as well is that although we are about to see this great apocalyptic clash between everything's going to suck but it's going to be okay in the end versus everything's going to suck and it has to be destroyed, the Force is the biggest variable that neither of these biblical texts that I talked to you about are prepared to face. Now, while we do have the New Republic form of government right now, I don't believe that Ezra's side and version of Apocalypse is going to initially start to triumph against Thrawn's. Now, there is a bit of imbalance that I would argue in the galaxy right now between the light and the dark, and I'm also referencing as a source right now in this video. It'll be a number for my bibliography as well. But there's an interview with Freddie Prinze Jr. where he talks about how the Force predetermines all fate. It doesn't matter who might be the strongest and who the weakest is. If there is an imbalance in the Force will correct it. And I feel like right now is a huge correction point in the balance of the Force. So I almost predict that Thrawn's side is going to start to beat down on Ezra's side a bit more until we get whatever the end is. I mean, it's a little bit of an awkward period of time, the timeline for Star Wars, because we're almost going to be approaching the sequel trilogy. So we don't really know what happens to the New Republic at that time. Do they stay the same and just ignorant of the cause of Thrawn, which helps create the First Order? We don't really know. That's something I guess we have to wait for in Ahsoka Season 2. But in the very end, I very much think that Ahsoka Season 2 is going to be this great fight of these two apocalyptic ideas clashing against each other, and it's going to be really cool and awesome. And overall, I really enjoyed talking to you all about this topic today. Thank you so much, Dr. Von Thaden, for allowing me to do a video presentation for this format as well. For my subscribers, if you made it to the end of this video and you were not bored to death about my religious talk, thank you so much for making it to the end. I really, really like discussing topics of religion, so maybe I could do this later at some points. Let me know in the comments down below what you think. If you want this to maybe be a reoccurring theme where I do maybe short bits about religion, themes, and Star Wars, let me know. But yeah, thank you everybody so much for tuning in today. Hope you enjoy the rest of your day, and we will see you soon in the next episode of the podcast.
Hey, this is Vanessa Marshall. I play Hera Syndulla on Star Wars Rebels, and you're listening to the 1313 podcast.